you'll remember that I talked about freedom of speech, freedom of thought on our campuses. It's incredible that you should even talk about this issue, because you would have automatically assumed that the university campuses of this country are places where freedom of thought and freedom of expression is built into the institution. It's sort of like, well, you don't even need to ask about it. But in recent years, the liberal left orthodoxy has become, well, more of an orthodoxy and more of an autocracy when it comes to both of those concepts of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. A large number of speakers, mostly conservative, no, I won't say mostly, all conservative, I think, have been deplatformed from those institutions, invitations withdrawn. And so the government have decided to amend the Education and Training Act, a bill currently before the House receiving submissions, that will make it compulsory for every tertiary education in this country to have if you like, a policy that upholds freedom of speech on campus and doesn't deplatform people of views that aren't meeting the orthodoxy. Well, as you would have heard from me just prior to 11 o'clock, the left, and particularly the the tertiary unions, the vice chancellors of universities, the head of Universities New Zealand, Chief Executive Chris Whelan, have all said, no, we don't need that, everything's fine. But New Zealand Initiative Senior Fellow Dr. James Kierstead, who we have to join with us now, says far from it, and we are not having our universities protect freedom of expression, exactly the opposite, and he joins us now. Dr. Kierstead, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome to it.
Thanks for having me.
You are a research fellow, as I understand it, the New Zealand Initiative. We've talked before, actually, a year ago, I see.
Yeah.
But I see you hold a BA in Classics from Oxford. Oh, that would have been a lovely indulgence. An MA in Ancient History from the University of London. An MA in
quite hard work,
Science.
actually.
Sorry?
BA in Oxford, Classics from Oxford was quite hard work, actually.
Oh, come on. It's an undergraduate degree. They give them away these days. An MA in Ancient History from the University of London.
My PhD at Stanford, actually.
And MA, yeah, that's, oh, and then you went on to do a PhD in Classics from Stanford. Well,
That's right.
you went from Britain. So are you originally British, or yes?
It's complicated. I'm actually originally Canadian. I grew up in an army family, so I moved around the world, and I ended up spending most of my teenage years in England.
Right, and then you went and did your master's and your PhD in Stanford. Listen, my niece went there. Remind me, where's Stanford again? What state's that in?
It's in California, so it's in Palo Alto, which is basically Silicon Valley. So it's south of San Francisco.
Right. So how do you end up, James, in New Zealand working for the New Zealand Initiative?
Well, it's interesting, actually. I mean, it's all about academic freedom, or it's partly about academic freedom. I mean, I came here to be a lecturer in classics because it's hard to get a job teaching classics at an academic level. So I applied all around the world, got a job at Victoria University of Wellington. I was very happy. I was very happy for the first 4 or 5 years. And then, as you know well, this sort of pall of identity politics started to descend on the organization. I thought there were problems that needed fixing. I started working part-time at the initiative. I came out with a report about administrative bloat, the number of administrators at New Zealand universities. And within a few months, I was out of a job. And so now I work here full-time on trying to reform the universities.
Okay. Just stay there for a moment, James. Josh, James is flowing in and out. Can you hear that? Yeah. So James, we're getting you sort of...
I actually have a microphone.
Is it?
Maybe I'll use this.
Okay, a bit closer. That'd be cool. Listen, that's okay.
Is that better?
Now, that sounds a little bit better. Listen, James, can I ask something of you then? You would have listened to the submissions from the university chancellors, from the Universities New Zealand, from the Tertiary Education Union, saying that we don't need to legislate for free speech and freedom of expression. I guess your personal experience would suggest the opposite, would it?
Yeah, it's not really just my personal experience. I mean, it's all the evidence that I compiled for the report that I released last year called Unpopular Opinions. And in that, we actually had 6 surveys looking at free speech, looking at student and academics' perception of the climate for free speech at New Zealand universities. We had 71 testimonies from academics talking about how they felt impacted by this issue. And we actually collected 21 episodes where free speech was relevant. And so it was very surprising to me to hear all those submissions where people were saying, there's nothing to see here. So Grant Robertson and Chris Whelan were basically taking the view, there's nothing to see here. They didn't really discuss any of the examples of deplatformings that we know happened. So Don Brash, for example, Daphne Whitmore at AUT, shutting down a commemoration of the Tiananmen Square massacre at AUT. So all of these things Chris Whelan didn't mention either in his submission or when he came on your show. And I found that very surprising. I mean, I know Chris Whelan a little bit. I've debated him. He seems like a nice guy. But I think one thing that people should know at the outset is that Universities New Zealand, it sounds like it's representing the whole sector. It used to be the New Zealand Vice Chancellor's Committee. All right, so my suspicion is that he's really speaking on behalf of the Vice Chancellors. And, the Vice Chancellors don't really want to discuss all these episodes in which Vice Chancellors themselves were heavily implicated in deplatforming people. So the most notorious example is Jan Thomas, who, when a student politics group invited Don Brash to speak at their campus, she sent emails around to her top brass saying, what can we do to shut this down? Can we discuss taking funding away from the student politics club, right? Derek McCormack was also, he's the then Vice Chancellor of AUT, heavily involved in shutting down an event to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre after meeting with an official from the Chinese embassy. So I'm not saying Grant Robertson's had time to do anything like that or that he wants to, but I mean, I think that's an important bit of context that I think that Chris is really speaking on behalf of the Vice Chancellors. And if you actually study what's happened at New Zealand universities over the past 10 years, Vice Chancellors and other top university managers are heavily implicated in the problem. And that's why we need legislation, because they're not going to solve the problem themselves.
When you talk about, you've given those examples, historic examples in Don Brash's case, do you believe, and then Otago University, I think in the last year, put together a free speech, if you like, charter, which they say will address these issues, and that they've done it themselves and that others may look at adopting it. Do you think that Otago University's charter does protect free speech and thought on that campus?
I mean, I think in principle, a lot of these charters that they put out weren't very good, and they issued revised versions, and they're a bit better now. Otago's was one of the better ones, and the Free Speech Union even praised it. But I think one of the big problems is just that these charters are going to be only as strong as the willingness of managers to actually promote free speech. And I think that willingness is very weak, because they profit from being able to shut people down. They like being able to shut academics down who disagree with them. And unless we force them not to do that, they're going to continue to do that. And it doesn't really matter what's in the charter. And this is the problem with the legislation as it currently exists. It still gives a lot of power to the managers. So there's an internal complaints procedure that they're going to set up for free speech incidents. But if that's only internal and it's only handled by university managers, if I get in trouble for something, a student complains about something I've said in a lecture, and I get taken to a meeting with a manager, and then I try and sort of complain about that, it's going to go to a panel inside the university composed either of those same managers or their friends, right? So that's not going to do anything, which is why that we've suggested in our submission of the New Zealand Initiative that they actually have an external appeal. So you try and exhaust the internal complaints procedure. If you're not satisfied with that, you can appeal to an external decision-making body. We think that that would be really important in making sure that this bill actually has teeth, because otherwise you leave it in the hands of the university managers. Those are exactly the people who've been causing the problem or who've been a large part of fueling the problem, and nothing's going to change.
Okay, but the examples that you've given, the two examples you've given so far, James, are, as I said, historic, and from a Vice-Chancellor who I think took an awful lot of flack, not just from organisations such as yourself, but also publicly as well, and I don't know if that policy still exists at Massey. I guess the question I'm asking you is, what would the examples be in 2025, as we talk now, where you believe that free speech or freedom of expression is threatened on our campuses?
I mean, I don't think it's a good argument to say like these issues were historic, because they've been happening in the past 5 to 10 years, and I think that they may well crop up again. But
James, that's the. I guess you.
It's historic, but I mean, it's not like you can say, oh, it's happening in the 19th century, it's not going to happen again, or even it's like it was happening in 2005 or something. These are happening in the last few years. I mean, so there's no reason to think these are going to stop happening, right? But actually, like after I published the report, New Zealand universities kept coming out with these episodes. So another one, for example, was at Victoria University of Wellington when they tried to have a free speech panel. You might remember they had to cancel that and rearrange it with different people because some radical student activists complained about it, and the managers, especially Nick Smith, the Vice Chancellor, didn't really have the courage just to say no to the students. Another one you might have heard of recently, I think she's made this point on the platform. Elizabeth Rata was asked to change her language in a lecture by a university manager at the University of Auckland after she said that there were two sexes. Right? So this stuff keeps happening. It's driven by some radical students. It's also driven by university managers. Often the university managers are the key point, right? They're the linchpin, because when people make complaints, they're the ones who have the power to either sort of defend freedom of speech and academic freedom or punish people who've been speaking. And so these examples are going to keep cropping up unless there's some kind of external intervention.
Okay, because I mean, one of the things I'd love to do is put you, James, in a room with Chris Whelan and with probably the vice chancellor or two. Is there any common ground that you have on this? It seems that you do have common ground. The common ground is yes, there should be freedom of speech and thought on university campuses, and no, it shouldn't be truncated. It's a question of how do we get to do that. The universities say, please let us self-regulate. We know this is important. You're saying, no,
Yeah,
you can't be trusted.